and welcome to Women Who Lead Change. This series brings together women who are redefining success, leading meaningful change, and exploring what becomes possible when we honor our biology, our nervous system, and our inner wisdom. And today I will be speaking with a very special guest, multi-talented Valeria Ricotti. Thank you for joining us, Valeria.
Thank you, Ula. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be here today and with you.
Thank you. I'm so happy you're here. So, a minute of introduction. Valeria is a physician scientist, pediatric neurologist, biotech entrepreneur, and author working across clinical neurology, drug development, and healthcare innovation. She has published in leading journals, including Nature Medicine, and is the co-investor of multiple patents and is the CEO and co-founder of UK-based biotech companies focused on neurodegenerative and regenerative medicine. So many different hats that you wear, Valeria. In March last year, she was recognized by the Italian Senate for her contributions to science and biomedical innovation. She's also the co-founder of Shironeko platform and the author of The Vermilion Bridge. It's a book that was launched at the Turin International Book Fair in May last year. Based in London, Valeria works at the interface of medicine, technology, and creative inquiry with a focus on translating science into meaningful real-world impact, which is why I'm so honored to have this opportunity to talk with you, Valeria, today. Because for me, this is what about my work is about too. Not about medicine, strictly speaking, but also about this inquiry into ourselves and into translating science into everyday life and world-changing impact. So I'm really glad you're here.
Thank you, Ula. And I think the work you do is incredibly valuable to women and to anybody who, as you said, wants to honor our biology and bring it into our profession and everyday life.
Yeah, thank you. So we have about 30 to 40 minutes, so let's get started. I'm really looking forward to having this conversation with you because I know you'll have so much to bring into into this area. I have a few questions that I prepared. I see this so much. Rest is so hard for the high achievers, for myself as a high achiever, and for the women and men I speak to and work with. They know that rest matters, but they struggle to access it. From your perspective and from neuroscience perspective, why is rest so hard for people who are used to functioning at high performance
Mm,
level?
mm. That's a very good question. So let's start from saying that rest is often misunderstood as the absence of activity.
Mm,
But when we look at the brain, and imaging studies show that we actually see quite the opposite, that the resting brain is metabolically very active, highly organized, and deeply integrative. So what happens in highly achieving individuals, and I think this is particularly true for women, the nervous system learns through conditioning, not insight. So we grew up in an environment, especially the Western world, where approval, safety, and stability were contingent on performance. And over time, what this creates is a powerful association in the brain where doing equals safety because you get recognition. And this association is not only a belief, it is really stored as a physiological pattern. So from a neurobiological perspective, this means that there is a chronic activation of the sympathetic nervous system and the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, so where the stress hormones are released, like cortisol. And this becomes a baseline baseline rather than just episodic. So we know now that chronic stress leads to this allostatic load, so the cumulative wear and tear of the brain and body caused by the repeated activation of the stress axis without adequate recovery. And that affects our mood. So what happens is that when we try to rest, we think that we're becoming inactive.
Mm.
And their nervous system interprets this stillness as a loss of control. And loss of control means panic. So slowing down removes these familiar cues of predictability. What's going to happen next? And the body therefore responds as with anxiety, with restlessness. And I think this is so embedded, especially in women, with a sense of guilt. You are wrong because you're resting, and you're wrong because this feels unfamiliar. And that's a wrong belief because we now know. I mean, one of the greatest, I think, discovery of neuroscience is the identification of the default mode network. I talk about it a lot in my blog. This network becomes actively precisely when we are not engaged in a task-driven effort. And this network is particularly involved in creative insight, in meaning making, and also in consolidating memory. So if we're constantly task driven because we want to be productive, we switch off or we quieten this default mode network, and we lose a lot of creativity, a lot of capacity to consolidate memory, and a lot of capacity to restore that gives us then the ability to be more efficient in our tasks. So it's a vicious circle. The guilt, the unfamiliarity of being in stillness, and this culture of being productive around the clock is distorting and destroying our neurophysiology.
Oh, when you put it that way, that's really heavy. I see it. I see there's so much in the work I do around rest feeling unsafe and people saying that I just can't stop, and that guilt comes up a lot. Um, I never actually talked about it in the context of feeling of loss of control, but stillness is that from polyvagal theory perspective that I have
Mm-hmm.
studied. Stillness is when we lose control, when we don't have access to mobility, right?
Mm-hmm.
Ability to run away.
Well, you can ask, I'm sure you have asked many questions, how many people, the question, how do you feel when you meditate for 5-10 minutes? Panic is the first response that the body has because we're wired to be highly efficient under stress.
Yeah.
But stress, that capacity needs to come in short bursts, and usually very active threats. So the usual story we hear is a lion, we run away. Okay.
Mhm.
I mean, the truth is that now that capacity of responding to stress instead of being acute has turned into a chronic state.
Yeah.
And the body now is so conditioned to be in that constant state of threat, even by a simple email or phone call or traffic, which is not a real threat, that the moment we ask our body and mind, let's be still, which again, let's remind ourselves, we're still active in stillness. It's a
Yeah.
different form of activity. It's the opposite of cortical stimulation. It's a different form of activity that sounds and feels unfamiliar. And as such, we feel we're losing control of our task-driven part of the brain, and we
Mm.
panic. And that
Mm.
shows how distorted this task-driven, productive, overproductive society has become.
Mm. And why can't knowledge or willpower override this? I see this so often that we try to, my clients try to think their way out of it.
Because willpower is a prefrontal function. So the prefrontal cortex is what is designed to do tasks, logical tasks. Is what we use all the day to be productive.
Mm.
But the threat detection, so the anxiety, the fear, occurs subcortically. And it's particularly the amygdala, that part of the brain that is involved with emotions, and then the brainstem that are involved in that part. So you cannot, the prefrontal cortex cannot tell the amygdala and the brainstem to behave differently. You need to get into that state of being, into a state of the brain where you are communicating directly with the amygdala and the brainstem and telling them, actually sitting down, meditating, taking a walk in the park without rushing, breathing,
Mm.
taking a bath is not a threat. It's aligning it with yourself, is bringing back that introspection within your body. It's actually giving a rest to the logical part of the brain and giving space to the more creative part of the brain. It's a form of active rest that
Mm.
is not only important to then be more productive, but it's essential for our health. Stress is the number one cause of many diseases.
Mm.
We know stress dampens the immune system. And if we damp the immune system, we are exposed to so many infections, but also to cancer. So for me, it is like, not only we should not feel guilty about resting, it should be mandatory in the day to carve out hours to dedicate to our body and to reconnecting with our body in whatever way works for the individual, because we're all different.
Hmm. Yeah, well, I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree with the element of rather than seeing rest as an afterthought or a moment of weakness, which is what's seen from the productivity point of view. Because let's be honest, we're actually not more productive when we're not rested. Okay,
You made a good point, that we're less productive
yeah.
when we do not rest. I think this is the beauty of the work you're doing. I think is re-educating our society, especially women in this leading position, to not to feel guilty about taking time to rest, but also to really understand that in order to be more productive, one needs to give space to these
Mm.
moments
Ah, yes.
where the cortisol, the noradrenaline are decreased, and the default network then gets space to bring creativity and to bring a broader vision. When we're stressed and under pressure, our vision, our
Mm.
vision, but global vision, not just the eyes, but also our emotional vision,
Yeah.
narrows.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, for example, we lose empathy. And we know perfectly well how, in any professional context, if we can be empathic, if we can make human connections at a heart
Mm.
level, so engaging our emotional intelligence and not just our cortical intelligence, we can achieve much more from meetings. So I recall from my times as a clinician doing long shifts in hospital. You do night shifts and then you work the following day, you have clinics, and then you do another night shift. So you're sleep deprived, you don't eat well, definitely no time for resting. You start losing empathy towards patients. And I hated that because I went home and I said, this is not the doctor I want to be. If because I get into survival mode, I lose that human connections with the
Mm.
patients, then I'm not a good physician. And that is, of course, is an extreme situation where you're really surviving. But in everyday life, in any profession, if you're constantly under stress, which puts your body in this threat situation, you lose that empathic connections with your clients, with your colleagues, and that is 100% a recipe for disaster, because then all the negative emotions surge and interaction with people become more damaging.
Mhm. Mhm. This is, yes, I mean, I've got so many follow-up questions, and one of them is around this. You mentioned this narrowing of view, of focus. This is very clearly communicated in polyvagal theory as well. As you said, it's
Mm-hmm.
physically that we have this narrow vision, and as you said, creatively and mentally, right? It's the emotions, it's feeling of our body and empathy for other people's feeling. And then there's the story. We become negatively biased, right? I mean, you can tell more about it, what happens in the brain. I know in polyvagal theory, we say that our nervous system state creates the stories we tell ourselves. So if we're in fight or flight, the stories are pretty negative and we have to fight or compete against others or run away, hide. Um, and then vice versa, the stories we tell ourselves create even more stress, right? And so, as you've alluded to, it affects our performance, it affects our work. I see it with my clients, affects their relationships, and it
Mm-hmm.
also influences the decisions we make as leaders, founders, and change makers.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
It's very true.
yeah,
So
say
the
a bit
the
more about that.
yeah, well, you said it correctly, and it is absolutely true. The perception itself is state dependent. So we think we are passive to reality. We just observe with all our senses, and we depict reality as it is. And that couldn't be more wrong.
Mhm.
Because modern neuroscience increasingly now understands that perception as a predictive process is it's a predictive process, rather than a passive one. So we're constantly building, rebuilding, we are decomposing and rebuilding reality in our brain. We are constantly creating the narrative.
Mm.
And that is driven by the emotion that we're. So we experience emotion, we sense how our body interacts with the surrounding world, and the brain interprets this as reality. So if we look, I particularly like speak about an author, Anil Seth, a lot in my blogs also. He describes perception as a controlled hallucination, which I
Mhm.
think it's a beautiful description. What we experience as reality is constrained not only by the sensory data, but by our physiology. Okay. So again, when our nervous system is dysregulated, predictions skew towards threat.
Mhm.
And that's fine if you're in a real life threatening situation. You have to be narrowed, your vision needs to be narrowed, you need to be focused because you need to survive and you need to run or find your way to survive that acute threat. But if we're constantly in that state, and of course, it's very good that our brain is wired to recognize danger, that we see, somebody with a gun and we
Yeah. It's
understand,
about
okay,
survival, right?
that person doesn't want our good.
Yeah.
So if we did not have that capacity, humanity would have been extinct long time ago. But when that dysregulation or that regulation under threat becomes chronic, and when there is no real life threat, then we perceive all reality skewed into negative.
Mm.
So it's very, and that completely drives our decision making. Um, I recently wrote a blog about the power of gratitude. Why is gratitude so important? Well, first of all, because for most of us in the Western world, we're not constantly living under real life threat every day. So to wake up every morning and find time during the day to be grateful for all the blessings we have, for everything that goes right in our life, for all the things we receive, which we take for granted, completely switches our nervous system from being focused on loss to focus on what we have. And
Mm.
that immediately moves us away from that um, way of feeling constantly under threat.
Yeah. Yeah.
Breathing, meditation, if one likes to meditate, but it can be walking in nature, especially where there is less sensory input, yoga, any practice that come from the Eastern world, where there has been over centuries and millennia much more of a focus on introspection, brings back that capacity to shift our nervous system towards expansion,
Mm-hmm.
towards relaxation, and towards then creating a narrative where there is blessing, there is abundance, there is a benevolent world, and we see the positive sides of people. We engage with more empathy, with more gratitude, with less critical, judgmental approach. And that can only bring more collaboration and more productivity. And of course, that doesn't mean, because the Western world is so concerned about switching off the critical part of the brain, the cortical part of the brain, and therefore missing out on clues that could be informative about whether something may work out or not. It's not true. One is not exclusive to the other. The brain can function as a whole. It's just
Yeah.
that we suffocate that part that can bring more space, more creativity, more capacity to function in a collaborative way and in a less dysregulated way. So there is only so much to gain from it.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. And that's what I really love about my work. That's what I love the most about my work is when people come to me feeling unsafe to rest and not feeling safe to slow down. There's that guilt, as we talked about, and inability to be still. Although, as we agreed, there's other ways to rest as well. They can be about stillness, but they can be about movement. And it's that opening of perspectives and opening of possibilities that happens when we experience safety and when we experience nervous system regulation, that all of a sudden the world becomes literally a brighter place, full of opportunities, full of connection, full of positivity, and where we are willing to take risks and we are less afraid of making mistakes. And yeah, we see how good of a place it is.
And when you are in that state, then you're also better prepared for those acute
Yes.
situations where you need to then narrow your vision, you need to
Yeah.
fight, you need to run away. But these becomes acute situations because we do have emergencies.
Yeah.
Sometimes we do
Yeah.
have real threats. But if we're in a constant state of exhaustions, everything just becomes a chronic threat
Hmm.
and you're dysfunctional at
Yeah.
360 degrees.
Yeah.
So that's really key. And I think what you're doing of bringing that element of safety in that switching off the overriding frontal cortex is really critical. It's the first step to learn to bring back normal functioning in our
Mm.
nervous system. And you said something really true. It does not just affect your profession, but also relationship. You bring that back home to your partners, to your kids, to your family, and that is so disruptive.
Mm. Yeah, I see people move from when we are dysregulating, when that chronic stress, from a place where it feels like there's no hope. And when they learn to access rest and nervous system regulation, they go, well, now I know how to find my way back from, I know that
Yeah,
this is a temporary place. As we said, it should be just acute. And I know how to find my way back. I have the tools, and it's like I have all of a sudden these resources within me that tell me I'll be okay.
exactly. And I think one of the most important skill we should all learn is breathing. Breathing
Mm,
properly, not
yeah.
passively, not without thinking. It is the number one skill that everybody should really invest time every day. I'm grateful to yoga because in a way that really taught me a lot how to connect breathing with
Mm,
movement and with my body. But again, we don't have necessarily to look into Eastern practices. There is so much knowledge that comes from the Western world on um, human physiology that can be enlightening and we can demystify it. But breathing is really so critical in all the processes involved in neuroregulation.
mm, mm. And you mentioned creativity as well, quite a few times. What becomes possible? We talked about a little bit, but I would love to expand on it. What becomes possible cognitively, creatively, relationally, when, yeah, when we have access to this regulated state in the nervous system rather than survival mode?
So creativity requires neural integration. And
Mm,
many people who are very creative will tell you that they have these eureka moments, these moments where they feel inspired, they have intuitions when they're under the shower, when they're having a stroll in the park, or just before they fall asleep, when the brain quietens and you get into this altered state. Under stress, the brain prioritizes speed and efficiency. It's survival mode, so you have to survive. There's no space for creativity. So I mentioned earlier on the default mode network.
mm,
This is a part of the brain that is essential for imagination and insight. And during stress, this part is suppressed. So at the same time, rigid top-down control dominates cognition. Okay. So when the nervous system shifts into a regulated state, then the network segregation softens. So there is a communication between associative, emotional, and executive networks. this communication resumes. And that happens when we're resting, when we're relaxing. And this is what brings then the creative mind at its best.
Mm.
So there is also a very strong embodied component. Rest enhances what I said before, this interoception, so the sensing of internal bodily state, which is also the foundation for intuition.
Mm-hmm.
It is really important to be in touch. I mean, in my work in biology and medicine, but I think this applies really across the board. When I sense my body, when I am connected to my body, I have these intuitions about, new ways of developing therapies, or what could therapy do to a certain disease, or how could a pathology actually work, because you're thinking outside the box and you are learning from your own body. But that, I think, applies to any form of intuition. You become a problem solver from a different perspective, not from the acute resolving an emergency situation, but from looking more at the bigger picture.
Mm.
What could be a paradigm shift here? So in
Solution
other
finder. You become a
so
solution finder.
yeah, exactly, but really looking at the broader picture. So creativity cannot be forced. You cannot get a musician or a painter, put a gun at their head and say, now produce art. They can do something technically good, but that's not art. So creativity cannot be forced, and only commanded by integration.
Mm.
And it only emerges from a place of safety and not urgency.
Mm.
So in a way, you mentioned my book, because people ask me, why did you write? Well, for me, writing was a way to create that creative space. It was a sacred space where I brought a lot of my knowledge of science and neuroscience, of my ideas of perception, of understanding reality. But instead of writing a science paper, instead of framing it in what would be the science language, which is very logical, although also very creative, I wanted this to be narrative. I wanted this to be framed in a context where I could tell a story, I could talk about emotions, and I could let this integrative part of the brain express the same ideas I have in science, but in a different context. And that forced me to create that space, because I could not write a page of narrative, of story, without having that restful environment. So I had often my dialogues between characters emerged from a walk in the park. I would go for a walk in the park, and then I would go home, sit down, and write the dialogues. That's how creativity works.
Mm. It can't be forced, can it?
It cannot be forced.
Mm.
So the more you try to force creativity through a sense of urgency, the less you can be creative. The more you try to be productive, the less creative you are. So you can
Yeah.
produce stuff, but that's not coming from a place of creativity.
Yeah. I remember when I was in the corporate, it was very, very, very highly demanding, high performance. And I remember those moments where small moments of break or time in between tasks. And I felt like I couldn't access that creativity. And I knew intuitively that I needed more space to slow down and rest. And I see it now in my work as the Queen of Rest when I work with professionals and business owners that creativity can't be forced. I can see how crucial it is for running a business, for expanding a business. And also, I like that you brought in the connection between creativity and intuition, or intuition and connection to our body, because they're all interconnected. And this is like another level of wisdom that we access. Um,
Deep wisdom,
wisdom.
which we have within us. This
Yeah.
is what astonishes me is that um, this school system, for example. No, I mean, of course, it has been a long time since I've been in school, but um, it again, it pushes you towards productivity. It's
Mm.
exam driven, it's results driven, when really should provide a safe space for learning, first of all, our neurobiology and our neurophysiology, but also to create that connectivity in our brain and that connection with our body, because
Yeah.
that's exactly how we learn in a more efficient way. So this is the paradox. We want to be productive, but we are inefficient in the way we are trying to be productive.
Yeah.
And the same thing applies to the corporate world. I always think the best way to be creative is to, you know, throw a bunch of really brilliant scientists in a room, give them a paper, give them a wall to write, remove the stress of having to search for the food, for running for to catch a train, and um, respond to an email. It's really about creating that environment where one is not afraid to say the first thing that comes to the mind, even if it may sound silly, and throwing papers on the floor, start building things from an absurd point of view, because that leads to something new, and certainly to a very creative way of solving a problem. And
Mm.
there are organizations that do this, that organizations that have understood to prioritize neuronal literacy rather than coping strategies. Coping
Mm.
strategies are introduced to corporations when there is already a situation of burnt out. That's too late. Okay, yes, you're trying to cope with her.
Yeah.
You voucher a massage to your employees. That's too late. It's at the beginning
Yeah.
when again, those moments of rest, of connection, of creative space are not perceived as a waste of time or guilt, but they are perceived as truly valuable. So that when the urgency comes, because inevitably you have them the moment you have to, um, you know, have your budget ready for your board meeting, then everybody's focused, laser focused, but also capable of sustaining that stress for those couple of hours or whatever it's needed.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and we both come from the corporate world, so we know how often that's really not valued.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's then turns people's experiences into ongoing survival mode versus thriving and growing. And as you said, and then when an emergency comes, or if it's ongoing for a long time, it turns into burnout and people are just exhausted. Um, but if organizations truly understood the biology of stress and regulation, um, what would they do differently about performance, leadership, and change? Because I have this dream. I have had this dream for as long as I've known about polyvagal theory that organizations, you talked about schools, I know you have background in the medical space, and I have this dream for the corporations that they become aware of the importance of nervous system regulation and rest. And I believe that from that perspective, success would become accessible to everyone. not just those who grew up with this privilege of knowing how to, I don't know, how to be resilient in the corporate environment. But I'll stop talking here and turn over to you. What do you think would be possible?
You said the crucial word is awareness. I think the first thing, education is required. So what you're doing is very important because you're educating. That always has a ripple effect. As I said, I see that a shift is happening. We are all becoming more aware as individual. Internet awareness of Eastern practices, a deeper knowledge of neurobiology, also how neuroscience is, with all the technology we have, like functional MRI and so forth, is reshaping our belief system. As I said at the very beginning, the idea that stillness is lack of activity in the brain couldn't be further away is a different from the truth. It's a different form of activity, which is restorative, but the brain is very active and is active in different regions of itself, and opens new doors. So I think awareness, education, first of all, and then there are already some corporations that are integrating coaches, work like you do. They're bringing them on board. Of course, that's easier for bigger organizations that have more finances available. And in Japan, for example, I really like this. There are a few companies that have cats in the office because, I think we both love cats. I see yours sitting
Yeah,
on the window. See,
this
mine is here next to me, sleeping on the chair. Cats have, all pets do, but cats in particular have this capacity to really down-regulate the nervous system. So they have this capacity to reduce stress, and this is proven scientifically. Purring is
Mm,
such a healing uh, power, has such a healing power. And why are they bringing cats into the office is exactly for that purpose, to reduce stress, to create that connection. When we interact with an animal and we cuddle a cat, we inevitably have a connection with our body, and we inevitably become more aware of our feelings, of our emotions, and the state of our body. I think it would be very important to introduce practices like yoga, meditation, breath work, workshops. Again, if people don't like meditating and doing yoga, breathing is something that should be a universal skill, whether you're
mm,
from the Western or the Eastern world. Building within the organization rhythmic cycles of effort and recovery. If there are quiet moments, why not creating an opportunity for recovery, which is not sitting at the desk getting bored or drinking more coffee. It's like create opportunities for the employees to recover. And then try and reduce as much as possible this urgency-based decision culture. I mean, my team knows that I detest to get to last minute tasks. So I always try to anticipate what could be the problems down the line. What could we do today to avoid these urgency-based situations? And this is something that I try to integrate in my work. Although biotechs are always constantly under pressure, what can we do to reduce that? And then train leaders, as I said, train the top to nervous system literacy. If the CEO, the CFO, if the C-suite is the first to set the wrong model, then that trickles down. So if the C-suite can engage even in most stressful situation with empathy, with emotional intelligence, with connection with the others, and most important, with self-care, then that sets a role for all the others. It's very important to understand that it starts from leaders, the responsibility to transmit that sense of safety to the employees, and
Mm,
not this threat tone, like this fear, or if I don't perform, then I lose my job. Then it's about creating, like you would do to your clients, and as parents to children, and as physicians, we should do our best to create a sense of safety to our patients, create an environment where the others feel that can open up, can share their emotions, their thoughts.
mm,
Um, and that's a lot of work.
yeah,
It's not easy
it's complex.
to do. It's complex,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
again, I mean, the
yeah,
journey is the beauty. It's not,
yeah,
is really not,
yeah,
it's a constant moving target, to
yeah,
grow and to improve
absolutely.
the way we interact.
Yeah. And that's why we need help with it, right? Since we haven't been taught at school, and some of us didn't benefit from learning safety and emotional safety, co-regulation from within our families in our childhood. Um, it's important to learn and deepen our awareness about it.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I think it's critical to have somebody who mirrors back. As much as we can learn these things and we can master all these skills, it is critical to have somebody else that says, look, Valeria, at the moment, you look pretty stressed. I sense your fragility. Maybe you want to push yourself, but I
mm,
feel listen to your body. It's very, very important to always have that external
yeah,
check.
yeah, yeah. That's why I love the work that I do, and I think it does have big impact on ultimately on culture, productivity, performance of organizations to be able to for leaders to bring that to their work, to their leadership, and then pass it down or trickle down through the organization. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
and besides that, it's also not just about increasing productivity. It's also enjoying
yeah,
ourselves while
absolutely.
we
Fulfillment.
produce.
Yeah,
Exactly, because ultimately we also need to enjoy those hours we spend at work.
yeah, yeah.
Otherwise, what's the point?
Yeah, that was kind of implicit when I talk about culture, but
Ex-
yes, I love that you brought it out.
mm.
I talk about a place where impact and fulfillment don't compete. And that's what rest and nervous system regulation allow when we master that. I'm looking at the time. So final question. If there's one insight you wish more people who are leading change understood about rest and nervous system regulation, what would it be?
But the message, I think, first of all, to say that rest is not withdrawal from ambition. It is a form of alignment with our biological intelligence. And a regulated nervous system does not make you softer. It actually makes you more precise, and it gives you more clarity. And it's not that you're not escaping from responsibilities. You're actually embracing them in a broader way.
Wow, that's so powerful. It rest doesn't make you weaker, it makes you stronger. It doesn't make you softer, it makes you more resilient. That's what I'm
Exactly.
getting from it. And
Yes.
you can, yeah, couldn't agree more. Okay, thank you very much, Valeria, for bringing your expertise and your lived experience into this space. Where can the audience find you? and you find you and your work, and if they wish to connect, how can they do that?
I'm on YouTube, I'm on Instagram. I have my personal webpage, valeriaricotti.com, where my blog is available both in English and in Italian. And my book, Il Ponte Vermiglio, is undergoing now translation into English. So I expect the English translation to be available by the end of this year.
I'm looking forward to reading your book. Thank you very much once again for your time and energy.
Thank
And
you,
I'll
Ula.
see you soon.
Thanks for the great work you do.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.